Criterion series always really was the best example of how to do a transmission line speaker properly. The new Criterion S230 is now a successor of that history. The S230 is a three-way design that has a 1-inch tweeter, two 4-inch mid-range drivers and two 6.5-inch bass drivers that work in conjunction with the transmission line. The mid-ranges and tweeter are arranged in a symmetric directivity pattern that we use in our solitaire range in the S430 loudspeaker. The S230 stands about 42 inches high and it comes in 3 different finishes. They're all satin finishes with a choice of black, silver and Macassar.
A very important development for the new Criterion was the new dome tweeter. It's no longer silk as we used before, but it's now magnesium. The magnesium has the big advantage that it's very light and very stiff, but the disadvantage could be that it breaks off and creates peaks. We avoided this by applying a very special damping material, which is light, but of course reduces any breakouts of the dome, so that we have a system which is very linear up to more than 50,000 Hertz and has no significant distortion in the entire listening area. In the development of the bass section and the entire transmission line, which is attached to the volume behind the woofers, it's very important to find the right mix between length of the line, shape of the line, and we have to find out how the resonances which are created by each separate line match together to give a relatively linear bass response. One of the problems we have with transmission lines is that the frequency response is not very linear up to higher frequencies. In fact, the problem is that we have very high peaks and dips, which is not wanted, especially if they reach into the mid-range. We have to find the right way how to damp those unlinearities in the frequency response. Therefore, we build special housings out of MDF wood where we can figure out how the dimensions of each part of the line should be. And that's the first step, and the second step is then to find out where the best places for damping the resonances is. It doesn't make sense to damp an entire transmission line because then the sensitivity goes down too much. It's very important that you find the right place where the peak of the resonances occur. It takes a long time. It's not only building the cabinet, but of course the measurements. And the end result is, as you can hear and as you can measure, that we have a really deep bass response, and it's very linear. We always followed the idea to set the crossover frequency between woofer and mid-range as deep as possible, so we can avoid all the problems the line creates at higher frequencies. Because we think it's not good to set the crossover frequency into the vocal area between 300 or 400 Hertz. It has to be much deeper and of course has to be relatively high. This is why we have the crossover point between mid-range and tweeter at around about 1800 Hertz. And therefore only the two mid-range drivers carry the entire vocal area. We have used in the past very often a loudspeaker system with two mid-range drivers. Especially our experiences with the new solitaire S430 showed us that it's possible to reduce reflections from sidewalls, from the ceiling and from the floor. The cone material we are using for mid-range and woofers is made of paper pulp, where we add wood fibers and carbon fibers on. Then it's dried on a special tool and foam. By this it's damping very good and it's relatively stiff, and we avoid resonances because of the little fibers which are in the material. We have no problems with break-off of the cone or with resonances.
Transmission line principle is quite expensive to do. So we spend a lot of money on the cabinets, which if you do bass reflex or like a closed box, it's a totally different thing. But we really think it's worth going down that road and spend the extra money to get really the best bass performance you can think of.
The result of all these measures is that the New Criterion is really an improvement compared to the older ones. The sound quality has improved in bass response and then especially in behavior in the mid and high range, and the entire signal response is much better than before.
Criterion has over 40 years of history at T+A, and one of the most successful models was the TMR 160, and the S230 is continuing that legacy at T+A.